welcome to Crime and Court. My name is Heather, and we are streaming and rewatching the 1993 Menendez brothers trial. So, this is California versus Eric and Lyle Menendez. They were young men. I call them boys all the time because I don't know, in my heart, they're always like children to me, like childlike is what I mean, like innocent and childlike. But they were men at the time when they took their parents' lives. The reason they did so is in their defense. They are using the defense of imperfect self-defense. Basically, it wasn't the best. Um, it doesn't make sense for like uh, I just lost my train of thought. It doesn't make sense for the self-defense argument, but it makes sense in the psychological realm of it when you look at everything all together. It is a self-defense because they were traumatized, they were pushed to their limits, living under the roof of a very, very tyrannical set of parents, not just one, but two. And they both were controlling, both quick to anger, very unwarm, unwelcoming, unloving to their kids is what, all the testimony has shown us. So, it's probably no surprise that this happened. We shouldn't be, I mean, I'm not condoning it by any means, but I'm saying like we shouldn't be surprised. Yet here we are trying to lock these boys up for the rest of their lives, and um, prison is better than the life that they had prior to going into prison. So just keep that in mind. With that in mind, let's begin. So today we're going to have the defense expert, Dr. William Vicary. Let me get my notes on him real quick. So he actually treated Eric Menendez. So he's a mental health professional. He treated Eric Menendez between 1990 and 96. So for approximately 5 to 6 years, he was actually had one-on-ones with Eric. Um, Vickery actually started treating Eric in June of 1990, and then by August of 1990, so 3 months, 2 to 3 months later, Eric was already starting to tell him about what was going on in his home, what was happening with his father. And as we know, Eric got the worst of the maltreatment from his parents, especially from Jose. And so we're going to hear testimony. This one's probably a little bit of a shorter one, but we're going to hear testimony from Dr. William Vickery. And then next week we have one more. Um, I'm losing words here. Sorry. One more expert. One more expert for the defense. And then we will get more into oh, then we're gonna hear the tape. Sorry, the tape is coming up soon. Why is my second screen keeps going in and out? I don't know why. So come back. Uh-oh. All right. So here we go. I'm gonna unmute you guys, and this is, like I said, William Vickery. Next week we're gonna have one more defense expert, and then we're going to hear the tape, the Ozeal tape. So. And then we're almost through the case. That'll be the end. We'll have one more wrap up of part 10 of lay witnesses. They call the lead detective once more to the stand. Also, and then that'll be it. That'll be when the defense rests, but we're going backwards then, and then we're saving Eric and Lyle's testimony for the very, very end. So, yeah. So just letting you know that's what's coming up. We're almost through it. It's been a wild ride. All right. So here we are. Dr. William Vicary.
All at LA County USC Medical Center. I stayed on as a clinical instructor and an assistant professor of clinical psychiatry in the Department of Law and Psychiatry for the next few years. My duties there consisted primarily of conducting psychiatric evaluations for the Los Angeles County Superior Court. I was also assigned to the California Youth Authority, Patton State Hospital, the federal prison at Terminal Island.
You've been paid approximately $24,000?
Correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
What the heck just happened? I don't know. The page just refreshed and went right to some other spot. I have no idea what happened. Sorry. Here we go.
In legal psychiatry, all at LA County USC Medical Center. I stayed on as a clinical instructor and an assistant professor of clinical psychiatry in the Department of Law and Psychiatry for the next few years. My duties there consisted primarily of conducting psychiatric evaluations for the Los Angeles County Superior Court. I was also assigned to the California Youth Authority, Patton State Hospital, the federal prison at Terminal Island, and I ran the sex offender treatment program at USC Medical School. In 1982, I went into private practice, and I spent most of my time doing legal evaluations for judges and lawyers.
Now, when you say that you did, that you do legal evaluations, okay, would you describe to the jury what you mean by a legal evaluation?
Well, individuals that have various kinds of psychiatric problems are just like everybody else. Some of them get involved in the judicial system. They get arrested for a crime. They are involved in some kind of a personal injury, a workers' compensation case, that kind of situation, in which case you can ask a general psychiatrist to evaluate such a person and prepare a report.
Like to do a psychiatric evaluation, in other words.
Right, and to prepare a report. The problem is that when the general psychiatrist does something like that, they prepare reports that are not very helpful to lawyers and judges. Lawyers and judges want to know more than just what's wrong with the person.
They want to know whether there's legal significance to what's wrong with them?
Exactly, and they want this explained in simple terms that they can understand.
Not just other psychiatrists can understand.
Right.
Okay. Now, you say you had been doing those kinds of psychological evaluations for the LA County Superior Court when you were affiliated with, was it the Center for Law and Psychiatry at County USC? Is that what it's called? And how long were you with the center?
From 1977 until 1982.
And since 1982, in your private practice, you have been doing similar evaluations, legal evaluations, correct?
Every day, every week.
Now, do you also occasionally act as a clinician in the sense of, do you occasionally conduct therapy with people?
Yes, I do. That's a small part of my practice, probably about 10%.
And is it usually affiliated somehow with the legal evaluations? In other words, do you wind up giving therapy to people who were originally sent to you for legal evaluations?
Well, I'd say it's about 50-50. I have a few people that come to my office that aren't involved in any way in the legal system. I'm also a volunteer medical doctor at a free clinic in Hollywood, and I am the only psychiatrist in Los Angeles County at any of the free clinics, so that I see scores of patients on a regular basis once a week during any evening. And I probably have 500, maybe 1,000 patients that I have treated as a psychiatrist every year at the free clinic.
So that's acting as a psychotherapist, if you will,
well,
a clinical psychiatrist.
That's right. I see people, I try and do an assessment, and many of those people require medications.
And as a physician, you can prescribe medication, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, getting back to your private practice, well, going back even farther to when you were with the center, focusing on criminal cases where you did psychiatric evaluations, how many homicide cases have you been involved with where you did an evaluation of the accused?
Oh, probably one a week for the past 15 years.
I can't do that math, and I don't have a calculator, so give me a ballpark. How many people is that?
About 750 cases, give or take 50, 100.
And how many cases have you been involved in where children have killed their parents?
Probably a half a dozen, maybe 10 every year for the past 10, 15 years.
So about 100 to 100.
Wow. He sees a half a dozen? Wow. Let's go back to that.
Have killed their parents?
Probably a half a dozen, maybe 10 every year for the past 10, 15 years.
So about 100 to 150 such cases?
Correct.
This is not a new thing. This is not new. It just became more public in the 90s. Obviously, we know so much more now, and we know a lot of telltale signs. I hope at least a lot of people are more aware of telltale signs of grooming and when a child might be in a situation like that. Or, we know to tell our children to be aware and to not leave our children with strange adults, you know. Although in this case, it happened to be his own father that was doing the horrible things. So that really didn't help him. But wow, it's amazing how many 10 to 12 per year, every year for the last 10 to 15 years. And that was in the 90s. Imagine what it is today. I would like to know those statistics. Holy cow.
And have you also done do you also do clinical or strike that, psychiatric evaluations of people accused of other kinds of crimes besides homicides?
Every day, every week.
And with respect to, have you done evaluations of persons accused of sex crimes?
Yes, I probably am the doctor in Los Angeles County that has done more of those kind of cases than all the other doctors put together. Primarily because I ran the sex offender treatment program at USC Medical School for 5 years.
And therefore you came in contact with exclusively sex offenders.
They were sent to me every day for evaluation and for treatment.
And when you evaluate, just focus for a moment, when you evaluated the sex offenders, did you have information about the alleged crimes that they were charged with?
In most cases, yes.
And did you therefore develop a body of information and expertise about such things as child sexual molestation?
Like it or not, I became an expert by going through hundreds and hundreds of cases and having to prepare written evaluations, testify in court, and familiarize myself with the literature in the area.
Okay. Now, when you get involved with the case, is there more than one way in which you can get involved in a case like this? In other words, are you always hired by one side or the other, or are there other methods by which you get involved in cases?
I would say, on average, it's probably about 2/3 of the time that the defense will ask me to get involved in that type of case.
And the other 1/3?
Would be split between the judge asking for it or the prosecutor.
There are situations in which the court can independently appoint a forensic psychiatric expert?
Yeah, that's routinely done.
And have you been retained by the prosecution to testify, in effect, against criminal defendants in homicide cases?
Yes, I have.
And in sex offense cases?
Yes.
Have you ever been hired by the prosecution to testify against a defendant in a parricide case, a case where a child has killed a parent?
I know I have by the court. I'd have to search my files to say for sure if it was the prosecution that asked me to become involved. My memory is that I have a vivid case where it was the judge himself who wanted the psychiatric evaluation done.
And did you wind up testifying?
I wound up testifying for the prosecution, yes.
Now, with respect to this case, you were not appointed by the judge, correct?
Correct.
You were hired by the defense?
Yes.
And do you recall, Dr. Vicary, when it was that you were first retained by the defense for Eric Menendez in order to assist with the psychiatric issues concerning him?
Yes, that was in June of 1990.
And what was your understanding with respect to how long Eric Menendez had been in custody at the time that you first came in contact with him?
I think he had been in custody about 4 months.
And what was your understanding initially of the purpose of your being retained to see Eric Menendez?
Well, to do what I always do. I mean, to evaluate the person and try and understand why they did what they did. And if the person needed some kind of a treatment, to treat the person. If a written report was needed, to prepare a written report.
On that note, I just want to say I really, truly hope that the boys have access to some kind of mental health professional in jail. I know it's probably, not very likely, but I would think more and more nowadays they would have this available in prisons, but I honestly have no idea. But I would hope that they have that within their prison systems to, just to process everything. I mean, these boys, they're now grown men and they still have that past and have to deal with that every day of their lives. And they're in a prison where they have to remember every day of their lives why they're there and the reasons they did what they did. Those reasons are always going to be in their minds. And I really hope that they have someone that can help them process those feelings that they have. It's just horrific. And if they don't, if they haven't had access to mental health professionals while they're in jail. I mean, this guy, yes, he while they were in prison, he was seeing them, but I don't know if it was court appointed or defense. Did he just say he was hired by the defense? I think he did. But he's doing more of an evaluation, not a treatment. So that's the difference here. Hopefully, Eric and Lyle were getting some kind of treatment, because if you don't treat it, it could turn into something worse. Just, having to live with those thoughts and memories, and you you're not a whole person anymore because someone took something away from you. So you have to deal with that. And I really, like I said, it's just horrible.
If there was a trial, perhaps to testify.
And do you recall what the first date was when you met Eric?
Yes, I do.
And when was that?
June 20, 1990.
And was that a private meeting, or were there other people present?
No, there were other people present,
And was that a meeting merely to be introduced to him?
primarily.
And what then was your first session alone with him?
That would be on June 30, 1990.
And where was he when you had this first session with him?
You're talking about the very first one, or the first meeting when
First
I met with him
session.
alone?
When you met with him alone, you didn't do any psychiatric work with him the first with other people present, did you?
No, primarily not.
Okay, so this is the first time that you're alone with him when you're attempting to do or starting to do an evaluation?
Yes.
Okay, on June 30th, 1990?
Correct.
And where did you see him? Where was he?
In a small room on module 1750 on the first floor of the Los Angeles County Central Jail.
Now, was it your understanding at that point, Dr. Vicary, that you were the only psychological or psychiatric expert to see him since the time he had been arrested?
There was not.
Perhaps I'll just re-ask the question. To the best of your knowledge, Dr. Vicary, were you the first psychological or psychiatric expert to see Eric Menendez after his arrest?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, I was.
And after that first session on June 30th, 1990, did you continue to see Eric?
Yes, I did.
And was there a period of time when you saw him regularly, weekly or near weekly?
Yes, I think I saw him on a weekly basis for about a year.
Now, you've indicated that what you usually do is to evaluate someone, and then if it appears that they need treatment, to also treat them. Is that correct?
Yes, I make that a part of almost every case. Treatment recommendations.
Okay. And are you always the person who gives the treatment that you recommend, or are you often recommending that the person seek treatment somewhere else if they're able to get treatment somewhere else?
Well, I cover the whole gamut. Usually it's not me that's involved in the treatment. If the person's going to go to prison, then I recommend treatment programs within the prison system. For example, they have a psychiatric hospital at a place called Vacaville between Sacramento and San Francisco.
Okay. All right. Now, with respect to Eric Menendez, how many times did you see him before you formed an initial impression with regard to his...
So that answers my question. I should just shut up and let them do their thing, because they do have mental health treatment programs within the prison system. However, he mentioned it being like off-site, so I wonder if you have to be transported. That's probably a more difficult thing to get done. But I don't know.
his mental condition?
Oh, I think I saw him 2, 3, 4 times before I had what I thought a pretty fair assessment of his mental condition.
Okay. How many times altogether have you seen him? And if you don't know times, how many hours have you spent with him over the course since June of 1990?
I have 88 one-hour visits, and in addition to that, I've seen him every week or every other week, kind of on an informal basis, because of where he lives at the jail. I have other customers up where he lives.
Customers?
So when I'm up there seeing these other individuals, I see Eric, when he's on the phone or he's on his way to the shower or something. So I usually stop him and I check on him for just a few minutes.
All right. And do you also keep a check on his medication?
Yes, I do.
He has a medical chart at the jail that tracks his medication. Do you make entries on it?
Yes, I do. I have been the doctor that has been the primary person who has supervised his medication.
Okay. Now, let's go back to when you first met him. You've seen him in session 88 times plus many other times just briefly, correct?
Briefly meaning 5 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, but not enough to bill for.
Okay. And have you also occasionally talked to him on the telephone? Has he called you, for example, when he had a particular problem or some distress?
Yeah, I think he's called me maybe half a dozen times over the past 2 or 3 years.
And were there times when he called you when you weren't regularly seeing him, when he asked you to come see him because he felt he needed to talk to you?
Yes.
Now, would you tell us what your first impression with regard to Eric Menendez's mental condition was?
Well, to use lay terms, he was a basket case.
Okay. Now, would you explain that lay term, he was a basket case? What do you mean by that?
Well, he was frequently tearful, sobbing, hysterical, withdrawn, constantly chewing his fingernails, his fingers in his mouth, refusing to have any direct eye contact.
Okay. What did this suggest to you?
Well, that in addition to other symptoms that he was experiencing, such as he was having difficulty sleeping. He couldn't get to sleep. If he went to sleep, he'd sleep a couple hours and he'd wake up, and then he couldn't go back to sleep. His appetite was poor. He was losing weight. He was having hallucinations.
Now, what, Dr. Vicary, is a hallucination?
It's a perception that is not real. For example, if I saw Napoleon's face on the wall in the back of the courtroom, obviously that's not true. That's not reality. But if I saw that and I told you I see it and I really believe that and that's the truth, that would be a false perception, a hallucination.
And is it a visual perception? Is a hallucination always a visual thing, or are there sound hallucinations, auditory hallucinations as well?
There can be hallucinations in any of the senses: touch, taste, hearing, sight. The most common hallucination are the auditory ones: voices, hearing somebody's voice,
and
as if there was actually a person there, whispering to you, saying dirty things to you, screaming at you, talking to you, making suggestions to you.
And this is more than just a thought in your head, or remembering, for example, my sister used to say this to me, and it's like I can hear her talking. This is different than that?
Yes, this is a experience that is real to the patient.
And what kind of hallucinations was Eric having at the time?
He was having both. I mean, he was seeing a green, frightening face, which was not there. And he was also hearing noises at night, whispers, his father's voice.
Was his father's voice saying something in particular?
Screaming at him.
Now, let me just ask you something. At this point, this you say is the condition that he was in during those first 4 visits? This was the initial impression?
Well, that's my initial impression, yes, that
Okay.
he was having these kind of problems.
Okay. At that time, had he yet related to you the recurrent nightmare of his childhood and teenage years about the green face?
No, I don't believe he had at that point.
But at this point, he's not telling you he's having a nightmare about a green face. He's telling you the green face is there
Yes,
in his cell.
yes.
Now, it's your understanding, is it not, that at night, after hours, he's locked into his cell, so nobody can come in and he can't get out?
On Module 1750, high-power module, the prisoners are locked into their cells virtually all the time there.
And that's where he was living at that time?
Yes.
And he's now on 7,000, and there were times later on when you saw him when he was on 7,000 as well, correct?
Yes, he's been on 7,000 now, I believe, the past year and a half.
And on 7,000 also, he has a cell all to himself that he's locked into most of the day?
Correct, but there's a lot more freedom on 7,000, so that he can go out in the hallway and at times use the telephone, converse with other patients.
Okay. Now, later on in your contacts with Eric, he told you about the dream involving the green face, correct?
Yes.
And you were able to distinguish his stories about the dream from these hallucinations about the green face?
Well, actually, I think it was kind of the same phenomena. When he was really sick at the beginning, it was more like a hallucination. Later, it
Receded back into a dream? I'm sorry. Later?
it was a nightmare.
Okay. But he told you, did he not, that it started out as a nightmare in his life, this particular...
Yes, later on, during the interviews, he told me that he'd had that nightmare even when he was a child.
Okay. And what, therefore, was your... are there any other symptoms that you observed in this time of first impression?
Well, he would become so frightened at times that he would have an anxiety or panic attack, where his heart would pound and he would sweat and he would tremble. He would describe this as a fear that he was falling apart, that he was disintegrating.
Now, you used the term a little while ago, sick. Was he sick?
Yes, these are all rather common symptoms of depression and anxiety. A moderate to severe depression, when you have so extensive a degree of the symptoms, especially the hallucinations.
Okay. Was there, and is that how you would describe his mental condition during your first series of interviews, that he was moderately to severely depressed and anxious?
Yes.
Now, we all use the word anxious and anxiety. I mean, I'm suffering from anxiety at this very moment, and so may you be. But you've also used the terminology with respect to my client at that time that he was sick. Now, what's the difference between the anxiety that you and I may be experiencing and what you're talking about with respect to him?
It's a matter of degree. I mean, as with any kind of psychological symptom, there's a little bit, and then there's a moderate amount, and then there's the kind where it's time to go see the doctor.
Okay. And he was of the kind to go see the doctor?
Well, he wasn't going to see the doctor was coming to see him.
But he needed the doctor.
He needed to see the doctor, yes, he did.
Okay. And was there any other diagnostic impression or diagnostic term that you would have applied to him during those early stages of your treatment of him?
Well, as I said earlier, the symptoms got so extreme that I was worried that he was going to have what we call a psychotic break. I mean, that does happen. You can get under so much stress and so depressed and so anxious that you can actually lose your grip and go over the edge. In my view, he was on the edge and he was teetering, and I was worried that he was going to become psychotic and we'd have to transfer him to the psychiatric unit.
So what did you do in response to these concerns?
I put him on medication.
And what medication did you put him on?
A combination medicine called Triavil. It has a tranquilizing antipsychotic medicine in it, like Thorazine. The one that's in it is actually Trilafon, T-R-I-L.
Are we supposed to know what Thorazine is? He's like, yeah, it's just like Thorazine. Okay. Anyways, I feel so heartbroken for Eric, knowing that he was going through this in prison, by the way, suffering these hallucinations in a room that he's trapped in with these green monster heads coming at him and his father yelling at him at night. This is awful. This is so heartbreaking. This is the sad part about this story is not that Kitty and Jose are gone. Okay, yeah, a couple of really horrible people lost their lives. Whatever. Um, was it not their time? Maybe it was because they're gone now. So I don't know. But the real tragedy in this story, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but they were not nice people, especially to their kids. Um, the real tragedy, like I'm trying to say, is the suffering that Eric and Lyle will have their entire lives, and the fact that they're in prison for it, for trying to escape the prison that they were in throughout their whole lives, growing up in the Menendez household.
L-A-F-O-N.
It has the same kind of effect as Thorazine.
It's in the same family, correct. And the second medicine in Triavil is Elavil, which is an antidepressant medication. It's very useful because the two medicines kind of balance each other out in terms of their side effects. So it's safe to use this medicine in a setting where you really can't see the patient on a real close day-to-day manner. And that's the way it is at the jail. I'm not at the jail every day. Mm-hmm. Usually I'm at a different jail every day, but I mean at the central jail I'm only there once a week. So to put somebody on the medicine and not see him again for a week, you have to be very careful.
With what kind of medicine you use?
Exactly.
Can you define psychotic?
That's a fancy psychiatric word meaning people that have lost touch with reality.
Now, did you form an opinion, Dr. Vicary, as to what it was, or whether one thing or a number of things, what it was that had rendered Eric Menendez in this condition where you felt he was teetering, I think you said, on the brink of a psychotic break?
Objection, be on the spot.
Now, did you continue to see him every week after you prescribed the medication?
Yes, I did.
And was there any change in his mental condition? And if so, would you tell us when it first became obvious that there was a change?
Well, he remained sick for a long period of time, for many, many weeks. And I had to double his medication, triple his medication, quadruple his medication. And it was only when he was at a moderate dose of this medication that his symptoms began to improve, and they gradually got better, to the point that I switched him to a milder medication after a period of months. And that's the medication that he remains on to the present.
And that's Xanax, an anti-anxiety?
Xanax is a medicine that has both antidepressant and anti-anxiety qualities. That's why it's so useful in his particular case, since he's had symptoms of both anxiety and depression.
Okay. Now, you said when you got him to a moderate dosage level, did you start out at a very low dose? Is that your practice?
At a place like the jail, where it can't be on a regular basis, I always start out, in most cases, with the smallest possible dose.
And so you had to keep increasing it till you got to a level that was moderate before you saw any change?
Yes.
And approximately how long did it take before you saw the change?
Several weeks.
Now, apart from the symptomology that you've testified to and his affect, the crying and sobbing, refusing eye contact, these things that you described, which told you that he was, to use your vernacular, a basket case, was there also things in the content of what he was saying to you that informed you to some extent about his mental condition?
Yes.
And without getting into great detail, could you tell us what it was he was talking about in these early sessions with him that was significant with respect to his mental condition?
Well, the very first things that he was telling me were exactly what I did not expect.
Which was?
How wonderful his father was. What a great man his father was.
And why didn't you expect that?
Objection irrelevant.
What did you know about him and the accusation against him that he had killed his parents from the very beginning of your contact with him?
Objection calls for hearsay.
What are you asking?
Well, did you know he killed his father? That's what I'm asking. From the beginning.
Or that he was accused of doing so?
No, that he did do so.
Objection lacks foundation.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Well, before you went to see him, okay, did you have information about whether or not he had admitted to anybody that he had participated in the killing of his parents?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Overall. Yes, I did.
And when you went to see him in the very first session, did he talk about killing his parents?
He admitted it the very first session.
And did you have to accuse him of it or draw this admission out of him?
No.
And how did it come out?
It seemed to be a spontaneous statement on his part in the very first session. He said, we, meaning he and his brother, killed our parents.
Now, you said that the topic of the first sessions that surprised you was he talked about how wonderful his father was.
Correct.
And what was it about that was notable to you?
No, object to this as being irrelevant.
Sustained.
Why was that? I think my original question about this was there something in the content of what he was saying that contributed to your opinion about his mental condition? Okay? And I think your answer was what he was talking about. Was the fact that he was talking about how wonderful his father was tell you that there was something sick going on here?
Your Honor, objection beyond the scope.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Okay. What was it about his talking about his father as how wonderful he was that was significant to you with regard to his mental condition?
It was diametrically opposite to the way he was functioning, the defendant. I mean, he was a basket case. He was crying, trembling, shaking, and I knew, and he admitted that he had killed his father.
Okay, so?
Your Honor, object to that particular question is beyond the scope.
All right, let's go on to something
No,
else.
okay, but I'm trying to understand, so why, with this being diametrically opposite to the way he was behaving, what did that tell you about his mental condition?
Your Honor, same objection.
Did it tell you anything?
No, it's a better question.
Yes, I thought it was very significant in terms of trying to appreciate his mental condition.
And why? What was its
It didn't
significance?
make any sense. It seemed to be kind of crazy to me. I mean, he blew away his father.
Excuse me, Your Honor, there's no question pending right now.
No, I think he's
All right,
explaining.
he's answered the question. Next question.
Okay.
That's probably not the way you want to word it, but okay, Dr. Vicary. We get the point.
And what was the, when you approach doing an evaluation of someone in a homicide case, when you're evaluating a defendant, do you have a certain methodology that you use?
Yes, I do.
And could you just briefly tell the jury what your method is? What do you try to do? What structure do you try to impose?
Well, briefly, I usually have read through the police reports and a lot of other records before I see the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
When I approach the defendant, I explain why I'm there,
Yes?
who asked me to be there. And then I take a history from the defendant, beginning with his family, schooling, work, on through to the more significant stuff, which is his psychiatric history, his alcohol and drug history, his criminal history, and then getting to the most important parts of all, how he was doing before he committed the crime, what was happening at the time of the crime, and then how he's been doing at the jail. So I chronologically try and track the person through time, from birth to crime to post-crime behavior, to try and understand.
And on average, Dr. Vicary, in most of the homicide cases that you have been involved with, how long does it take to get at least the framework of this history, family, school, work, psychiatric history, alcohol, drugs, criminal contact, how doing before the crime, time of crime, and
Let's
jail?
not repeat everything you just said. Let's just ask him the question.
How long does it usually take you to get all that?
I can usually do
Why does this judge piss me off so much? I don't understand. And the prosecution keeps objecting to the question. She just has to keep like rewording the question until the judge says, yeah, okay, this is overruled. It's like, come on. She's trying to get to the same thing. Just let's move this along.
most of it in the first hour.
And when you approached your first session with Eric Menendez, was it your expectation that you would try to get this kind of information from him, as you usually do?
Yes.
And were you able to do that?
No, I was not.
And why were you not?
Well, he kept rambling on about his father, and I tried to get him to stop, and he wouldn't stop. And I tried to tell him that we didn't have that much time. I needed to get more information. I wanted to know about his mother and his brother and school, and he didn't do what I wanted him to do. He just kept crying and telling me how wonderful his dad was, and that went on for like the first 2, 3, 4 hours that I saw him. I couldn't control him.
And was that significant at all in your assessment of his mental condition?
Yes, it was.
And why was that significant? In what way?
That was very, very unusual behavior for a patient. Even the schizophrenics and manic depressives that I see, they can usually give me a history, or almost all of the history, in the first hour or two. Here was a kid that I thought was of average to above average intelligence, who could, I thought, help me begin to understand this situation, and it wasn't working.
What wasn't working?
And he wasn't a kid, actually. He was in his 20s at this time. So when he was being treated. So um again, it's like they're so childlike in the way that they think and behave because of the trauma that has happened to them. So we do think of them more as like boys, you know. So even even the doctor says this kid, but really he was a grown man. I mean, 20 something, as he's seeing in in his 20s. This doctor saw him within a span of 6 years. So um, you know, figure that out. I don't know the math, but he was obviously in his 20s during this time, and an adult, because he was 19 or 20 when he got arrested. I can't remember, but around there. So we know that he was an adult. But yes, it's very odd behavior of an adult male to be sobbing and uncontrollable like that. Usually, that is not the case, even in traumatic, even with people who have experienced trauma in their childhoods, they don't usually. So, to me, it just makes me think like he is, number one, feeling guilty about it because he's just a sweet boy, and two, um, that he was so psychologically affected by his father that he can't determine or distinguish the bad from the good. That's my take on it. Let's see what Dr. William Vicary has to say.
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained. Let's move on here. We've gotten bogged down in this.
Were you able, therefore, after the first few sessions with Eric, to understand the situation surrounding the killing of his parents?
Not really.
And did he, during those first few sessions, give you information about his parents? Any factual or historical information?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled. You can answer that yes or no.
Yes.
And did he give you any information about himself or his school background?
Yes, he did.
And did he give you information about his relationship with his parents?
Yes, he did.
And did he give you information about his feelings about his parents?
Yes.
And did any of this information help you understand what had happened?
Some of it, yes.
Did you feel that you understood it enough to complete an evaluation?
No, I did not.
And why not?
Objection irrelevant.
Well, it's a rather open-ended question. Ask something else.
All right. Did you feel that there was information that was being withheld?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overruled. You can answer that yes or no.
Well, I don't think it was a question in my mind about something being withheld. It's just that
You can't answer that yes or no.
All right. Did you feel that you were being told everything there was to tell, whether it was being withheld or just not being told?
that was a distinct impression I had, is that the pieces didn't fit together.
Now, at some point, did Eric Menendez start telling you about sexual molestation by his father?
Yes, he did.
And did he also tell you about learning that his mother knew about it and what that revelation did to him?
Yes.
And do you recall when it was? Now, strike that. He didn't tell you about that in the beginning, did he?
No.
And when was it that he first started telling you about sexual molestation by his father?
In August of 1990.
And at that point, you had been seeing him for 2 months or so. It was the end of August?
Yes.
And at that point in August of 1990, had his condition improved at all from when you first saw him?
Yes, it had.
Now, had you been giving Eric therapy over the course of the 2 months that you had been seeing him, or had you only been trying to evaluate him in that time?
Well, I was trying to do both, but I suppose I was mainly treating him because I couldn't do the evaluation because I couldn't control him.
And to what do you attribute the fact that you couldn't control him? Was he just willful or what?
Objection, beyond scope.
Overall.
Well, primarily it was just how sick he was. And moreover, I think that it was a reflection of his basic personality structure.
In what way?
He was just a very emotional person. He was bubbling over with different kinds of feelings and emotions on an almost constant basis. He was not a reflective, intellectual type person, like a lawyer or like a doctor or a judge.
Okay.
Some of the above.
Or most of the above.
Most of you, though. And so did that mean that he had no control over what he was saying?
Well, he didn't have any control over it, and I don't think I had any control over it. And it was very frustrating for me because I am an intellectual, reflective person. I like to be in control. I like to have structure. I like to get the job done. And he was frustrating me. He just kept emoting.
Is there a name or a label for that kind of personality?
Well, I think that excessive emotionality is part of different disorders. One would be a histrionic personality disorder.
What is a histrionic personality? Well, first of all, did you diagnose Eric as having a histrionic personality disorder, or did he just share this characteristic?
No, I think he just shared the characteristic. He doesn't have enough of the criteria to make that diagnosis. What he was just a person that was stressed out. He's always been a very emotional person, a sensitive person, and he was just...
Yes.
I mean, he was just out there. And I tried to bring him together, and it didn't work.
Ultimately,
I wonder if he's a highly sensitive person. And yes, that's an actual thing, an HSP. I am one. I feel things much more deeply than other individuals. I hear things, like I'm hyper vigilant. That's one of the characteristics. There are a lot of things that I'm hearing about Eric and how emotional he is and how deeply he feels about things that maybe he's an HSP. I wonder. I don't if you guys are ever interested, Alanis Morissette had a documentary, something, what was it called? Too Sensitive, or what was her documentary? She's also an HSP, which is probably why I've always loved her music. Let me look it up because now I really want to talk about it. Um, Alanis Morissette, what is her documentary called? No, not Jagged. She's got another one. Alanis Morissette bashes HBO documentary Jagged. What? Okay, that was like 2 years ago. All right, I'm going to find it and I'm going to get back to you on HSPs.
over time, it appeared that, let me strike that. Now, was he in this very emotional, stressed out condition when he started talking about the molestation?
Actually, he was better when he started talking about the molestation because he was medicated. He was on moderate doses of the Triavil, and he was sleeping better. He was not hallucinating. He was not having these panic attacks. And he was not bursting into tears every 5 minutes.
Was his basic personality structure any different?
No.
And how would you describe that basic personality structure?
Very sensitive, very emotional, very spontaneous, very impulsive.
The title of her documentary is called Sensitive: The Untold Story. If anybody is interested, there's also a book. I think it's right behind me, if I can find it. There's a book on highly sensitive people. Just to give you an idea, I want to look up highly sensitive person. Just to give you a definition of what this is. All right, so a highly sensitive person, or an HSP, this is from Psychology Today, by the way, is a term coined by psychologist Elaine Aron, and that's one of the books I have. According to the Aron theory, HSPs are a subset of the population who are high in personality trait known as a sensory processing sensitivity. And this it's unknown why this happens, but it happens in all species on the planet. So it isn't just in people. So those with high levels of sensory processing sensitivity display increased emotional sensitivity, stronger reactivity to both external and internal stimuli, which means, you could cry more, pain, comma, hunger, light, and noise, and a complex inner life. So all those things, all those stimuli, noise can like upset you, give you panic attacks, like anything that is listed here can you have a stronger reaction to it than a normal person, and a normal person might not even notice the noise um, that you do. So overall, about 15 to 20% of the population are thought to be highly sensitive. If you've had instances where people tell you you're too sensitive, and you've always felt like people don't understand you, and you take things too emotionally, too you internalize things, you might be an HSP. Just saying. It took me a long time to realize that I was one. It's interesting too with HSPs, they also have a lot of um, correlating, or not correlating, but comorbidities such as like autoimmune diseases and fibromyalgia and things like that, which I have fibromyalgia and autoimmune diseases, so that makes sense. Um, HSPs are thought to be more disturbed than others by violence, tension, or feelings of being overwhelmed. They may, as a result, make concerted efforts to avoid situations in which such things are likely to occur. So you might even be like scared to go outside, or you avoid social events. On the more positive end of the trait, high sensitivity is thought to be linked to higher levels of creativity, richer personal relationships, and a greater appreciation for beauty. So there are positives to being highly sensitive. You just have to learn to know how to use it, how to work with it. Also, I feel like um, with the help of medication, you can also like it dulls the HSP part of you, which is helpful. So, like I take Lexapro and Lyrica for my medical conditions. I don't want to get on a rant about this, but it's really important that people know about this, and this just made me think about it, and I want to get it out there and use my experience to help you guys. So, HSPs, what was I just about to say? I don't remember now. Oh, the Lyrica and the Lexapro um, combination, I think, kind of dulls the high sensitivity in me. Like I still notice the things, I'm still there, it's still in my environment, but I don't freak out about it. So it really does help. And medication can help if you are an HSP. There are other things you can do. Meditation is great because it can help calm you back into a state, a calmer state when you get worked up. So, anyways, sorry. That was my PSA on highly sensitive people. If you find the book from Elaine Aaron, can't remember what it's called. I think it's just called Highly Sensitive Person. And then there's also, like I said, that sensitive documentary by Alanis Morissette, which I think I saw it on, it might have been Amazon Prime or something. It was really good and made me feel like I'm not alone. All right, sorry, back to this. I'm going to roll it back a couple seconds just so we get the question and answer. He was talking about panic attacks and moods and whatnot.
Kid. He was on moderate doses of the Triavil, and he was sleeping better. He was not hallucinating. He was not having these panic attacks. And he was not bursting into tears every 5 minutes.
What's his birthday?
This is by August, by the time he's been on the medication for a while, and it has helped kind of even him out a little bit more.
Personality structure any different?
No.
And how would you describe that basic personality structure?
Very sensitive, very emotional, very spontaneous, very impulsive.
Are people born with those personality structures, or are they made, or is it a combination?
Overall, It's a combination
A combination of what and what?
of what you're born with and the environment.
And can this emotionality and sensitivity and impulsiveness be enhanced by the way that you're treated as a child?
Yes, it can be encouraged or it can be suppressed.
Now, when he first started, first let me ask you this, Dr. Vicary. Up until the point when Eric Menendez started to talk about being molested by his father, had you asked him about sexual molestation?
No, I had not.
Had you asked him about abuse?
No, I had not.
Had you asked him any questions about how did your parents treat you or what did they do to you?
Well, I tried to ask him questions, but I learned early on that it didn't do much good because he just kept emoting and talking and rambling on.
And were there times when you actually tried very hard to rein him in, when you insisted that he try to respond to what you were asking?
Well, it was pointless at the beginning. I tried it over and over again. It didn't work, so I learned to quit because there's no point in trying it. When he got better, I was able to focus him in on, tell me about your schooling. Let's start with the elementary school and tell me about that and so forth, and to track him through that. What would happen is that we'd start out good, and then usually what would happen is we'd drift off.
And where would it drift to?
His parents and things that had happened between him and his parents.
Because that's what he needed to talk about, Dr. Vickery. That's what was bothering him. He needed to talk about those things. It's not that he just couldn't control it. It's that that's what was bothering him.
So up until the point when he started to talk about molestation, would it be fair to say that you had not suggested that to him in any way?
Well, I wanted to ask him about it, but I mean, that's one of the last questions that you ask because it's one of the more sensitive, see? And I wasn't anywhere near there. I was still on the educational history and the work history. This is the beginning part, see?
So when it started to come out, the story of his childhood and the molestation by his father, was it in response to any questions of yours, or was it just coming out?
It was just coming out, whether I wanted to hear it or not, whether it was relevant to any question we started with or not.
Was he trying to, did he give this to you as, wait a minute, I want to tell you what really happened here. Here's the story. I was molested, I was abused, that's why I killed my parents. I mean, did it come out that way?
No.
Could you tell us, characterize, how did it first come out?
He was talking about his relationship with his father and some of the things that were happening with his father.
Was this something he had talked to you about before?
The problems that he had with his father, yes, he had talked with me about that before.
Without mentioning molestation?
Correct.
And do you recall what first of all, you have in front of you a sheaf of long yellow papers, do you know?
Yes, I do.
And what are those?
These are the notes that I made each time I saw the defendant.
And did you make the notes as you were talking to him?
Yes, I did.
And those are called contemporaneous notes?
That's a fair description.
Okay. And calling your attention to page 28 of your notes, is that the first place where there is indicated a reference to Eric being molested by his father?
Yes.
And do you recall, I mean, if you want to review the notes, fine, but do you recall specifically what was being talked about when that first came up?
That particular session started with a conversation about relatives, his Aunt Terry, and then his cousin Andy.
Did he tell you something about his cousin Andy that led to, in the form of the discussion, that led to talking about the molestation?
Yes.
What did he tell you about his cousin Andy?
That he knew about some problems that he was having with his father.
When Eric told you that, did you know at that point in the session what problem he was talking about?
No, I did not.
And what was the next topic of this particular session after he told you about his cousin Andy knowing about problems?
His nightmares, waking up at night crying, breaking down in his cell, crying all night.
Okay. When he talked about the dream, waking up crying, was he talking about his mother there as well?
Yes.
And did he tell you that in this dream he wakes up crying, "Mom, I hate you"?
Yes.
And did you understand at that point in the conversation why he would have a dream about hating his mother?
No, I did not.
And did he then change the subject from breaking down in a cell and crying all night to something else?
Yes.
And what was it he then changed the topic to?
He was talking about as each week and month goes by, he seems to get more and more angry and upset about his parents.
Angry and upset about them, or angry and upset at them?
At them.
And is it after he tells you that?
This is interesting because the farther away you get from your traumatic situation in time, I mean, like the further in time that you are from it, the more distance that you have from the abuser and yourself, obviously, distance and time and all that, like the longer you are away from that person, the more you realize how awful they were, how poorly they treated you, how much you were a victim, what they did to you, and it victimized you. You relive it. You it took me months to realize I was a victim of DV after my ex-husband and I split. It took me some therapy, some learning about myself, some self-reflection, and a lot of uh, learning about this topic, trauma, how it works, how it affects people. So it takes time to realize that you're a victim. You don't even realize you're a victim when you are in it. You don't think of yourself as a victim. You just think, well, this is my reality.
That he starts to explain why he was angry and upset with his mother at this point, why he's feeling angry and upset with his mother.
Yes.
And what does he tell you is the reason why he believes that now, while he's in jail, he's angry and upset with his mother?
Because he said he found out 1 week prior to the killings that his mother knew that his father had been molesting him.
And was that the first mention he made of being molested?
Yes, it was.
So it was not presented to you as a story about, poor me, I'm a molested kid, my father was a real bad guy.
Objection, Mrs. Lincoln.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Okay. Did he present the information about being molested to you in the form of an excuse or an explanation for his parents or why he killed his parents? When he first starts, do you understand the question?
Yes, I think I understand that question. I don't believe so. It's a rather vague general question.
Oh, okay. When you're treating someone, okay, is the jumping off point for treating someone in legitimate therapy working with whatever feelings, strong feelings they're experiencing at the time?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained as to the question.
At this point, when Eric is telling you about the molestation, when he starts to tell you, are you treating him?
Yes, I am treating him.
And are you trying to stop him from expressing feelings about his parents? Or are you trying to encourage him to do that? Or just letting him do that?
Well, basically, at this point, I'm just keeping my mouth shut and listening.
Okay. And you're not suggesting anything to him?
I don't think that would work. I can't control him. He won't even answer simple, direct questions and stay on topic with me. So I have learned that we're not going to go that way. I want to go that way. We're not going to go that way.
So you're just listening. You're not suggesting anything to him?
I have no choice. I have to shut up and listen.
Okay.
And this is in his best interest in terms of trying to treat him, because it seems to be helping him. He seems to be getting better. The medicine and me just shutting up and listening.
Okay. So his talking about things seems to be making him better.
He seems to be getting things off his chest and emoting and crying and so forth. It seems like it's a release for him. He gets a benefit out of it. He tells me that...
If we could just use the past tense, since this all occurred sometime in the past, it would help so that we don't confuse things with what's happening today.
Okay.
He told me that he felt better after each of the sessions, and he appreciated it, and he looked forward to the next session.
Now, when he mentions in this particular session in August that...
Can you even imagine having all of these secrets in your head that, I just feel so bad for this kid. Like, he never told anybody except, like, a cousin or a friend here and there, but for the most part, he didn't tell anybody. And Andy, as far as I know, was the only person that he really told, his cousin Andy. But anyways, sitting there and processing all that trauma, all that hurt, all those emotions, and being such a highly sensitive person, this was the first time he was able to ever express what he was going through. So I'm kind of annoyed by this William Vicary doctor that he keeps saying, well, he was just rambling and rambling and it was frustrating me. Well, too bad, buddy. He hasn't had a chance to talk about any of this stuff in his entire life. He's been controlled and manipulated and abused and essayed and whatever by his dad his entire life. This is the first time somebody's listening to him. And if he wants to ramble, let him ramble.
He is upset with his mother because she knew that his father had molested him. Did you then start asking him questions?
Yeah, I think at that point, not being a dummy, I said, why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay. And was that all you said before he started telling you more about it?
Yes.
And what was it he then told you? I'm not going to go through this line by line, but in this first session, in the first few sessions where he's talking about the molestation, what basically does he tell you?
Objection vague as to when.
Right, just generally, you're talking about one session or more than one session?
Were there a couple of sessions, two or... Well, let me ask you this. Would he then, from the time he first mentioned the molestation, would he, on his own, willingly talk about it in every single session after that?
No, he was very reluctant to talk about that.
And would he talk about it, say, in one session or two in a row, and then on the third session start talking about other things and not refer to it?
Oh, it was more than skipping one session and then talking about it in two. It was more like it would come out in one session, and then there'd be 3 or 4 sessions where it wouldn't be talked about again. Then there'd be a little bit of it in session number 5 or 6. Then there wouldn't be any for the next 2, 3, 4 sessions. That kind of situation. I think there were times when I would see him half a dozen times, 8 times, and this would never be mentioned. I wanted to know about it, but I realized that if I pushed it and I went into that area, that nothing was going to happen.
Did you have an opinion as to why it was he wasn't talking about it each and every time?
It was extremely painful for him.
And how do you know that?
Objection beyond scope.
Sustained.
May we approach?
No, let's just move on. Let's keep moving here.
What was his demeanor, or his affect, I think is the word psychology, when he would talk to you about the molestation?
He would look down at the floor. There would be tears in his eyes. Sometimes he would be sobbing. He would be gasping for breath. His hands would shake. Sometimes his whole body would tremble.
That's him reliving it. His body remembers that fear, that emotion. His body remembers it. He's reliving it through his senses. And it's just awful.
And when he told you, you've indicated it would be broken up sometimes for a month or two, even if you're seeing him once a week for 8 sessions would be 2 months, correct?
Yes.
And then he would talk about it some more. Did it come out as a continuous saga, or was there a lot of repetition and a lot of disjointed references?
Well, I think it'd be better to describe it as it came out in fits and spurts.
Okay. And was there any organizing principle to how the information was coming out, or would he simply ruminate upon aspects of it?
Well, I think the only order to it was that when he first started talking about it, he started talking about it at the beginning, when it first started happening to him. Okay, and then the story kind of, in bits and pieces, came out on an intermittent basis for the next several months in a chronological story.
So basically, were you asking questions about it in a chronological way?
Objection vague as to when.
Overruled.
No, I think at this stage, I'm not really asking any questions. I'm just sitting there.
I understand, but now that is vague as to time. You mean at the very beginning when he's talking about it, he starts to tell you how it started, correct?
Correct. And despite the fact that he is better over time, I still can't structure him.
Now, over time, does he go back when he's talking about it to things that happened earlier and things that happened later and jump around to different aspects of it?
Of the molestation, or
Yes.
of the molestation? I think that would be a fair statement.
And did he spend a fair amount of the time during those sessions when he would talk about it, talking about how he felt about it?
Yes.
Now, did he ever state to you, Dr. Vicary, that he had certain symptoms or consequences or effects of having been molested?
No.
Did he appear to be trying to convince you that he had been molested?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
No.
Did he ever claim that it was some excuse that justified what he had done?
No.
In fact, over the course of your treating him, did he ever tell you that he felt justified in what he did, for any reason?
Objection beyond scope.
Sustained.
Now, is it significant in evaluating someone, strike that you've evaluated people, both in homicide cases and in other cases, who claim to have been abused as children?
Your Honor, objection beyond scope.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
Yes, I have.
And is it significant in evaluating such people, whatever their crime they're accused of, for you to form an opinion as to whether or not they have indeed been abused as children.
Objection, beyond scope.
All right, counsel, you may approach and we'll discuss it.
This is only foundational, Your Honor. I wasn't going to ask for that opinion at this time. I was still on a process question.
Well, let's move on because we just have too much this foundational stuff and then we never get to the issues here. So why don't you ask?
Now, why don't I approach it? I don't think you understand what I'm
All right. Okay.
Okay, just to back up, Dr. Vicary, did you have an opinion as to why it was that my client did not tell you at the very beginning of your relationship with him about the sexual molestation by his father?
Objection, beyond scope.
Sustained as to that question.
In your experience, is it unusual for people who have been sexually molested to not give that information up initially?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled. Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, it is very common for people that have been molested to not come forward with that information.
Even when they're seeing a professional?
Correct.
And why is that?
It's a dirty secret. There are powerful feelings of shame and self-blame, humiliation.
So it's even more exceptional, I guess, isn't a word. It's more exceptional that Eric came out and talked about it. I mean, I guess he didn't talk about it right away, but he just kind of threw it out there. I don't know. It did take him a while. Never mind. Okay.
And let me ask you this. When Eric did start to talk to you about it, were there components in the way he talked about it of blaming himself and humiliation?
Yes.
And was there anything about his mental condition when you first came in contact with him that, in your opinion, militated against his talking about the molestation in the very beginning?
Yes.
And what was that?
Well, I think he was in the process of having a nervous breakdown. He was just too sick.
So that wasn't the most critical issue at the time?
No, it was not.
What was the thing that he was talking about when he was, in the beginning, when he was so sick?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled. You
What
answer
did
the question.
seem, if you will, what did seem to be the critical issue emotionally for him?
Telling me what a great family he had.
Because he's been programmed. He was programmed by his parents to put up that facade. So, of course, he's going to put that facade up because that's what he knows to do. That's what he knows. So he's going to continue to do that until it just comes out. Well, she knew the whole time my dad was doing that. So that's how it came out. Just nonchalant. I'm mad at my mom because she knew that my dad was doing this to me. So it's almost like taking that anger and putting it on his mom in order to then place his anger on his father. It's like he doesn't want to place his anger on his dad, almost.
Now, based on now.
You guys hear that? That's my dog. She's sleeping. Hold on. She growls and snarls and does all these kinds of things in her sleep. I swear. I mean, she must be having some good dreams about chasing squirrels and stuff because, man, she gets excited. Sorry, I had to share.
Over how long a period of time did you continue to receive information from Eric about the molestation by his father? Well, first about that.
Off and on for the next several months.
Now, he also talked to you, did he not? And without getting into what he said, he talked to you, after telling you about the molestation, he talked to you about the events that led up to the killings.
Objection, beyond scope.
Sustained.
But we're not going to get into it, John. It's just foundational.
Well, let's go to the next question then.
He didn't just talk about being molested for the rest of your 70-some-odd visits with him, did he?
Of course not. He talked about mostly other things.
And what were the other things, just as topics, that he talked to you about over the rest of the course of your contact with him?
Objection, beyond scope.
Overall, just in general, what sort of things?
Right.
Well, all sorts of things. His school, his relationship with his brother, his tennis, his relationships with friends, family members, long-standing problems that he had with his parents.
Did he talk to you about the killings?
Yes, he did.
And did he talk to you about what led up to them?
Yeah.
Objection beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Yes.
Now, did you form an opinion, Dr. Vicary, as to whether or not the history of sexual molestation that Eric Menendez was giving you was consistent with the literature, with your own experience on the sexual molestation of children?
Yes, I did form an opinion
And what was that opinion?
that it was consistent.
And was it your opinion that, in some way, the sexual molestation by his father did have some effect on the events that led up to the homicide?
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Now, as a evaluating forensic psychiatrist,
Isn't that what we're here to learn? Did those events trigger the boys to do what they did in fear as a reaction? I mean, aren't we here to learn that? And yet we ask the question and objection sustained. Okay. What was her question again? Let's go back.
and was it your opinion that, in some way, the sexual molestation by his father did have some effect on the events that led up to the homicide?
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Now, as a evaluating forensic psychiatrist, do you try to develop in your own mind a personality structure of the people that you're evaluating?
Yes, I do.
And I think you've told us something about what your initial impressions of Eric were. Was there, in your opinion, anything in his personality structure that made him more vulnerable to, say, other types of personalities to being abused as a child?
Yes.
And what were those things?
He seemed to be a very dependent, clingy type person, looking to others for direction, a person that was somewhat suggestible,
And what do you
weak,
mean by suggestible?
inclined to do what other people told him to do, regardless of what he felt like or what he thought was right.
Okay.
He was a fragile individual. His self-esteem was very poor. He did not have self-confidence.
Well, neither one of them would have self-confidence because both their parents constantly put them down. How would they ever have learned to value themselves as a human being because their parents never gave them credit for anything?
And would he have a tendency to, kind of, people like this, would they have a tendency to blame themselves for things that happen, to be down on themselves, to be angry with themselves?
Well, they would be the kind of person that if other people said that they were bad, that they would accept that.
And did you find in your assessment of Eric that he believed himself to be bad?
Yes.
Did you, in fact, evaluate his entire self, as we call it, self-concept, what he thought of himself?
Yes, I did.
What did he think of himself?
Essentially that he was worthless.
Now, Dr. Vicary, you didn't just talk to Eric Menendez in order to come to these conclusions about his personality structure or your opinion about the consistency of his information about sexual molestation. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Did you have available to you during the course of your therapeutic relationship with him a large number of materials from sources other than him?
Yes, I did.
And could you tell us just generically what you had?
Well, I had the police reports, the notes and tape recording of Dr. Oziel, the autopsy reports, the transcript of the grand jury, a whole series of witness interviews, prosecution witnesses, defense witnesses, psychological testing that was done on the defendant when he was younger in 2 different schools, his medical records. Mm-hmm. And finally, I met...
You have his school records?
Yes. I met his grandmother at the family home in Calabasas.
Which grandmother?
Maria.
You said you met her. Did you interview her?
Yes, I did.
And at the time that you interviewed her, did you introduce yourself to her as Eric's psychiatrist?
Yes, I did.
And you informed her that you were gathering information to eventually to present during the trial of the case?
Yes.
And did she talk to you?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
Yes, she did.
And did she talk to you about the family?
Yes.
Was she cooperative?
Objection irrelevant.
Overruled.
Yes, she was.
Now, Dr. Vicary, you said you've talked to about 750 people who've been accused of homicide, correct?
Yes, well, actually talking to them, I mean,
You've evaluated them.
those are evaluations. I've also talked to other people for treatment issues and so forth in the prisons and jails and state mental hospitals where I have worked.
When you're doing an evaluation of someone, and even when you're treating someone, are you concerned about whether the information that you're getting from them is reliable, such that you could base opinions upon it?
Yes.
And what do you do to assess the reliability of the information you're receiving from? Well, let me ask you this. As a forensic psychiatrist, is it a given that when you're seeing people who are in custody, who are charged with serious crimes, that they have a particular kind of pressure on them that someone going to a psychiatrist for treatment on the outside doesn't have?
Yes.
Do you believe that they have?
It disappears when that happens.
And in evaluating Eric Menendez, did you have the same concerns that you have with everybody else?
Yes, I did.
And do you have any concern now about the opinions that you formed based on the information that you received from him and all the other information that you've been presented with?
It's also vague.
Let me ask just two other things. Were you present in court for part of Eric's testimony?
Part of Eric's testimony?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe I was.
Were you here for Lyle's testimony?
No, I was not.
Whose testimony were you here for?
I was here, I believe, 2.5 days for the first part of Dr. Oziel's testimony.
Okay. And did you read all the rest of Dr. Oziel's testimony beyond that 2.5 days?
Yes, I did.
Have you, in fact, received transcripts of every day of this trial?
Yes, I have.
And have you read them?
I have read them all the way up to Judalon Smith, through Judalon Smith, and that's where I'm at now.
Okay. And did you read all of Eric's testimony and all of Lyle's testimony?
Yes, I did.
Now, did you, before the trial began, meet with Ann Burgess and Ann Tyler to
Yes.
discuss the case?
Yes, I did.
And did you acquaint them with your observations and opinions and diagnostic information about Eric when you first saw him and over the course of your treatment of him?
Yes.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. What we'll do then is recess until tomorrow morning and get a fresh start in the morning at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss this matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. Don't permit yourselves to be exposed to anything about this case outside of the courtroom. And we'll resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. See you back here then. There was some brief further direct examination.
Yes, very briefly. Dr. Vicary, when you were talking yesterday about some of the resources and materials you had available to you, I wanted to ask you if you didn't also have all of Dr. Summerfield's notes of the therapy of Mary Louise Menendez.
Yes, I did.
Did you have all of Dr. Cox's notes?
Yes.
And did you also participate in an interview of Dr. Cox?
Yes, I did. I met with him at his office and spoke to him for about 2 hours.
And did you also participate on May 21st, 1993, in a meeting with Dr. Oziel and his attorney in which the Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were discussed?
Among other matters, yes.
Okay. That's all I had, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Good morning, Dr. Vicary.
Good morning.
Now, you've been a forensic psychiatrist for approximately 15 years, is that correct?
Yes.
And could you tell me the number of times that you've actually testified in court as an expert witness?
Over that period of time, probably 300 times, 400, 500 times.
Now, I believe you indicated that
She wants to try to discredit him? Okay.
2/3 of the time you testify for the defense, is that correct?
Yes.
And is that over a 15-year period that you're getting that calculation?
Yes.
And you indicated that the other third of the time you testified for the court and the prosecution, is that correct?
The court or the prosecutor, yes.
Okay. Of that third, how much of the time have you spent testifying for the prosecution?
Probably about a third of that.
So a third of a third, a ninth?
Right.
All right. Now, could you tell me how many times you've been called as a witness by the prosecution in a homicide case in the last 5 years?
I would say probably to work on the case or to actually come to court and
Come to court and
testify.
testify. For the prosecution in a homicide case?
Probably only a couple cases a year.
A couple of cases a year? Could you name the last case that you testified, last homicide case where you testified for the prosecution?
I think if we called my secretary, she probably would look through the files and be able to find that.
But
There's so many cases.
But I take it one doesn't come to mind, is that correct?
Well, I just did a case in Pomona where I testified for the prosecution. It's a homicide case. The issue that I testified on was the defendant's competency. He was faking being crazy. That case was John Marks in Pomona, and that would be 2 weeks ago.
All right, but you were appointed by the court to examine the defendant, and because of your findings, the prosecution called you, correct?
Well, that's a good question. We'd have to ask the prosecutor if the prosecutor selected me himself, or whether it was the judge that picked me in that particular case.
And that was a competency hearing which was not held in front of a jury, is that correct?
No, there was a jury in that case.
Okay. So that was the last time you can think of when you testified for the prosecution, is that correct?
Correct.
And how many times this year have you testified for the defense in a criminal matter?
Actual courtroom testimony?
Yes.
Probably 1 or 2 cases a month.
For the last calendar year, 1993?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated that you have patients in private practice. Could you tell me how many patients you presently have in private practice? I mean, people you're treating, not people you're just evaluating.
These are people that would be completely outside the legal system.
People that you are treating as a therapist versus people that you are actually evaluating for courts or for their attorneys.
Oh, I would say I would only treat maybe a half a dozen people every week as a therapist.
I believe you
At my office. Now, remember what I testified to on direct examination. I'm a volunteer medical doctor at the Hollywood Sunset Free Clinic, so every Friday night I'm down there, and I see 15 to 20 patients over the evening, and those are all treatment cases, you see, and I follow them week after week. So that would add up to an additional 15, 20 patients every week, so we get a total of me treating maybe 25 patients a week.
When you treat the people at the free clinic, do you take notes of what you're treating them for?
Sure.
And do you date those notes? In other words, you put dates on the notes so that there can be some sort of follow, so that someone can follow the medical.
Actually, I don't put the dates on. The intake worker puts the date on. They have a new sheet every time they come in. We take the blood pressure and the pulse and all that. So the date is up on the sheet.
Now,
I don't have to write it in.
Okay, now you provided the prosecution yesterday with 101 pages of notes that you have from this particular case, correct?
Correct.
And there are no dates on those particular notes.
Actually, there's a
Now it's all electronic, thank goodness, and you can actually access your medical records, some of them, from previous doctors and previous facilities that you went to. It's at least I can in my chart, and it's great. Before we used to be all on paper. Now it's all digital, and you get your notes immediately updated in your chart, which is fantastic, and you can access it so like immediately after you leave. So it's great. But man, times have changed. So if you really think like 1990s wasn't that long ago, holy cow, it was. I feel old.
couple of dates in there, but you're right. Generally, there are no dates.
Okay, so how is it you're able to determine when specific things were said to you, or you reach specific conclusions in this case if your notes aren't dated?
It's only by approximation that every page to a page and a half of notes represents one session with the defendant, you see. So you can kind of track through that.
Okay,
There's 88 sessions, you see, and there's 101 pages of notes. So it's like every page or so is another session.
Okay, but you don't have dates on those particular pages so that one couldn't be precise as to when particular things were told.
That's right. That's right. It's a bad habit of mine as a forensic person is that it's very rare, if ever, that when I see the person, it matters at all. So I usually don't write it on my yellow notes. Some doctors do. I think most doctors do. If you're a treating doctor, if I was working at like in a regular medical clinic or psychiatric outpatient clinic, you always date your progress notes.
All right, so you do have the habit of dating your notes if you're in one environment, and in a different kind of environment you don't. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I know. I think that there must be something rebellious in my character, but when I do this forensic work, I just refuse to date my my notes.
And it makes it difficult for a prosecutor to pin you down, too, if your notes aren't dated, right?
Well, in the typical case, which is 99% of the time, it doesn't matter because I've only seen the patient once or twice, you see, and we can track that in my schedule real easily, so I'm able to answer that question. This is a very unusual case in the sense that I saw this person so many times over such a long period of time, and I was acting more as a therapist than an evaluator.
Now, I believe you indicated that you were contacted originally to do a forensic evaluation.
Yes.
Okay, and that was the primary purpose at the beginning that you were contacted for, correct?
Yes, although to be fair to the defense attorney, it was also meant that I was also told that I would probably have to treat the defendant because he seemed to be a person that needed counseling or treatment. And I replied, I'm not a treating type of person. You should find a treating doctor. I'll help you find a treating doctor. And the response was...
Excuse me, I think you've answered the question, Dr. Vicary.
I think you really have.
All right. All right. Dr. Vicary, in the number of cases that you've testified in court, do you normally write a forensic report when you're seeing someone for forensic purposes?
In the typical case, almost always.
Okay, did you write a forensic report in this case?
No, I did not.
I believe you indicated that your observations of Eric Menendez when you first encountered him, and on many occasions after first encountering him alone, was that he was, I think you said hysterical, correct?
Yeah, I said a lot of things, but hysterical was one of the words, yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you some questions there. It's not about this particular defendant, okay? I'm going to ask you some generic questions, all right?
I'm going to object to relevant.
I have no questions, sir.
Dr. Vicary, you've indicated that you've spent a great deal of time conducting forensic evaluations of people in custody. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And so you spend a lot of time at the Los Angeles County Jail, correct?
Unfortunately, that's true.
All right. How many times a week would you say you go to the jail?
The Central Jail downtown?
Yes.
Almost every week, one time a week.
All right. And would you say that it is a pleasant place for someone to live? Well, are you happy when you leave?
I'm going to check that, Your Honor.
Okay. Dr. Vicary, would you say that living in a jail environment is a stressful living situation?
For the average person, yes.
And would you say that, how would you say that guilt affects a person's state of mind? In other words, does guilt cause stress in people?
I'm going to object to these questions as irrelevant unless they have to do with Mr. Menendez.
Does guilt cause stress in people, Dr. Vicary?
Yes, it does.
Does fear of being convicted of criminal offenses cause fear in people?
Yes, it does.
Does it cause anxiety and depression?
It can.
Now, one of the symptoms of stress is sleeplessness, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And would being charged with a capital offense be something that would cause stress in a human being?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that being incarcerated in county jail is generally easier on people who've been there many times before than for people who've never been there before?
Definitely.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated that you found Eric Menendez to have auditory hallucinations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, an auditory hallucination then is when someone tells you that they're hearing voices, correct?
Well,
Well,
it takes more than that. That's usually the start of it.
All right. An auditory hallucination is something that you can't test anyone for, correct?
Yes.
Right. And are you aware of the Rosenhan study?
Yes, I am.
And in the Rosenhan study, wasn't one of the ways that the patients...
I'm going to object to this unless there's a foundation that this witness relied on that study, not just that he's aware of it.
You're aware that in the Rosenhan study, some of the people who participated were told to fabricate auditory hallucinations so they could get checked into mental hospitals.
Same objection.
Yes.
Right, so an auditory hallucination is a rather common type of thing for someone to say they have. In other words, it's an easy thing for someone to say they have because you can't test for it.
Correct.
All right, and so an auditory hallucination is something that is self-reported, correct?
In general, yes.
Okay. Now, you were aware of the fact, were you not, that during the summer of 1990 that Eric Menendez was going to court in Santa Monica on occasion? Is that correct?
Yes, I was.
All right, did you ever find his condition to be such that you wrote an excuse that he couldn't go to court?
No.
All right. Now, I take it you never went to court and observed him during court during the summer of 1990. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I believe you've indicated that you're familiar with some of the testimony in this case up to the point of the Judah Lund-Smith testimony, correct?
Yes.
And you reviewed the testimony of Eric Menendez's coach, Mark Heffernan.
Yes.
And do you remember the testimony from Mr. Heffernan when he was asked to describe whether he had seen Eric happy during any period of time after his parents' deaths before his incarceration? Do you remember those references?
I think in a general sense.
People have emotions. Your emotions, you can go through every single emotion on the spectrum in one day, maybe even within 5 minutes. Just because you show some signs of happiness doesn't necessarily mean that you're not struggling in here. And that is what this prosecution fails to understand.
I do.
Okay. Now, did you see any indication, either from Mr. Heffernan's testimony or anyone else's testimony, that Eric Menendez was suffering from auditory hallucinations before he was incarcerated?
No.
Okay. Now, if someone told a person to act crazy around you, is there any kind of test you can give that person to see if they're faking the craziness?
I'm going to object to the former question.
Rephrase the question.
All right. If someone told someone else to tell the psychiatrist you're hearing voices, there's no way you can test for that, correct?
I'm going to object to that question.
Objection sustained.
Okay. I believe you indicated that one of the things that you noted about Eric Menendez's personality is that you thought that he was suggestible. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what does suggestible mean?
As I testified on direct, it means a person that is impressionable, that can be given commands or directions and is more inclined to follow them than the average person or the rebellious, stubborn person who's you give that person an order and they're inclined to go the opposite way.
So it was your finding that Eric Menendez was suggestible. Is that correct?
To some extent, yes.
And that means that people could suggest things to him, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, have you found that someone who is on trial for their life might have a motive to lie or exaggerate or fabricate?
Of course.
I believe you indicated that part of the treatment that you gave Eric Menendez was that you medicated him on occasion, correct? With different kinds of medication.
Yes.
And presently he's taking 0.25 milligrams of Xanax twice a day.
Actually, I think he's only taking it at night now.
Okay.
The order may be still in place that he can take it in the morning and the night, but by his own account, I believe he's only taking it now at night.
What is the smallest dosage that a person can take of Xanax?
That is the smallest dose.
I believe you indicated that when you first spoke to Eric Menendez, that one of the things that surprised you is that he had expressed love for his father. Is that correct?
Objection stated.
Excuse me. He expressed admiration for his father.
Yes.
All right, and you found that surprising. Is that correct?
To the extent that he went on and on about it, yes.
Okay. Is it common for people who have been abused by their parents to hate their parents?
That's a great question. I mean, you would think that everybody that's been abused would hate their parents with a passion. Actually,
They don't. They don't. They still talk about their parents with admiration. I can attest to this with experiences and people that I know and their experiences. I will attest that you don't necessarily hate the person, the parent that did the things to you, but you still like hold them with like this high regard, and you talk about them like half the time they're a good person, half the time they're a bad person. And I'm not going to get into details and how I know this, but I'll just leave it at that. People that I know talk like that. So, and they had physical A in their household growing up.
Actually, some kids do, and lots of kids don't. The ones that don't have a lot more problems than the ones that do.
All right, so that not all children who've been abused by their parents love their parents. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
All right. Now, I believe you indicated that the first indicia of sexual abuse surfaced in late August of 1990. Is that correct?
Yes.
And since your notes aren't dated, how is it that you place it at the end of August of 1990?
The first mention of the molestation occurs on page 28, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's about a third of the way through the notes.
All right, so you're picking this particular date simply because it's a third of the way through the notes?
Roughly, yes.
Do you have any idea who was visiting Eric Menendez before you began to see him and during the time that you were seeing him prior to August of 1990?
Who was visiting
him at the jail?
In addition to his attorneys?
Right. Do you have any idea did you ever check to see who else was visiting him?
Well, I was told by him and the lawyers that...
Right. I wasn't asking you what you were told. I was
the specifics.
asking. Yeah, you know what hearsay is, right, Dr. Vicary?
Yes.
Okay, because you went to law school.
I hope I do.
Okay. All right, so I'm not asking you to relate hearsay. I'm just asking you, did you check by going
Why is she so rude?
through any records or with anybody to see who else had been visiting him? That's my only...
Not any written records, no.
All right. I believe you indicated that the first mention of the sexual abuse was general in nature. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the specifics came out in bits and starts. Was that I think that was your phraseology yesterday?
Yes.
All right. And that was over a long period of time. Is that correct?
Correct.
The notes that you have provided us, the 101 pages, what is the last time that you took notes?
The last entry on page 101, I made last Saturday at the jail.
All right. After this trial had been in progress for several months, correct?
Correct.
At the time that Eric Menendez mentioned the sexual abuse, did you take a sexual history from him?
No, I did not.
Your Honor, I'd like to approach.
And ask you can be answered yes or no, okay? Was there any particular reason you didn't take a sexual history from Eric Menendez?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the information that you got from Eric Menendez about the sexual abuse, was it your understanding that you were the first person told?
Yes.
And it wasn't until after he was arrested and incarcerated then that he told about the sexual abuse. Is that your understanding?
No.
Well, I'm talking aside from the cousin. Was it your understanding that since the murder of his parents that you were the first person, excuse me, let me back up. Were you the first person that he told since he'd been incarcerated, as far as your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And in August of 1990, was it your understanding that Eric Menendez was preparing to go to trial in this case?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how much money have you been paid in this case, Dr. Vicary?
Thus far, I think almost $24,000.
And how much do you charge per hour?
I'm billing for my work at the court rate of $100 an hour.
All right. And do you get the same rate for testifying as you do for just reviewing or interviewing? Or do you get more money for testifying?
That's a good question.
Well,
I think you probably get less when you figure it out, the court rate.
all right.
The standard court fee works out to be less than $100 an hour for
All
testifying in court.
But to date, that is before having testified in this case, you've been paid approximately $24,000?
Correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All experts are paid unless for some reason they are subpoenaed or I don't know, something like in the case of Karen Reed, which is very, very rare, the feds gave over information about their case. So the experts that the defense put on were under subpoena. They had already done the reports, the ARCA reports and the biomechanics and everything, the physics and stuff that Trooper Joseph Paul would say. So they had to come to the stand and testify to it under subpoena. However, if the defense had hired them or hired them to do that report, they would have had to pay them. So in all cases, usually experts on both sides, the prosecution and the defense, are paid, unless for some reason you have like something unique like a subpoena or something like that, or a volunteer like a Dr. Russell, the doctor that also testified in Karen Reed. She volunteered to help in the case of testifying because she was like, those are dog bites and that didn't happen by a car. So yeah, it's very rare that experts are not paid.
Dr. Vicary, are you currently being paid with taxpayer funds?
Yes.
Are you court appointed at this point to assist the defense?
Objection beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Yes.
How's that beyond the scope? You brought it up. You opened the door, Ms. Bazanich. Beyond the scope. as to whether taxpayers are paying for that 24,000 that I just accused you of sort of being a paid expert, just a paid talking head.
And as part of what you're being paid to do is read all the transcripts of this trial so that you would be adequately prepared for any question that either side could ask you.
Yes.
And that takes a great deal of time, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And with respect to your billing, I think you said there were about 88 sessions with Eric Menendez.
At the jail, yes.
And at the very beginning, when you were first retained, you were being paid privately from cost funds that were made available from the estates. That was your understanding, was it not?
Yes.
And at that time, you charged more.
Yes, I did.
You charged how much an hour?
200 an hour.
And that was for the first sessions, correct?
Yes.
And then when there was no more of that money available, the county, the taxpayers were being asked to pay, and then you reduced your rate to the court rate, the public rate, correct?
Correct.
Take that, Miss Bazanich. Don't talk unless you know what you're talking about.
Are you here because this case is making you rich, Dr. Vicary?
Well, it's not making me poor. I mean, it's helping me pay the rent and
Okay.
the expenses.
You're always paid for your work, aren't you?
Well, in most cases I am. Sometimes it doesn't work out and I don't get paid.
But you expect to be.
Hopefully.
Yes, just like you know the prosecutors expect to get paid for their work as well.
Assistant.
And when you testify for the prosecution, you get paid then at the same rate, correct?
Yes, there's no choice about the rate.
All right. Now, with respect to the other time that you spent besides your interview time with Eric and the review of the documents, you also met with the other experts in this case, did you not?
Not all of them, but some of them, yes.
You met with Dr. Burgess and Dr. Tyler?
Yes.
And you also factor in reading, what, about 3 boxes of materials of witness interviews?
Yes.
And, of course, you had to review much of that before you were called to testify, is that right?
Yes, I reviewed all of it before I came to testify.
You've already told us that you've evaluated about 750 different people accused of homicide. Are they all basket cases in the jail?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
No, most of them are mentally quite intact.
And to what did you attribute the fact that Eric Menendez, accused of homicide, facing capital charges and in the jail, was a basket case?
Objection needs to be answered.
Overall.
Well, I think there were several factors.
Go ahead.
He's in jail. He's not used to being in jail. He's in a pretty tough part of the jail, this high-power module where some of the roughest customers are kept. He's charged with the murder of his parents. He's facing the gas chamber. All of that was very stressful for him.
And
It's also true that he was having a lot of grief and remorse about being responsible for the death of his parents, and he was ripped up about that. It's also true that he was struggling with why he did it, what had been going on in his life, why he had been so depressed, suicidal, miserable, desperate, long before he killed his parents. And lastly, he was struggling with this fact that he had been sexually molested by his father, and he was very ashamed about that and conflicted. And he was torn about whether he wanted to tell anybody about that or not.
And even when he started telling you about it, did he tell you that he really didn't want to?
Right, and he gave me several reasons for not wanting to talk about it, no matter what, even if it meant spending the rest of his life in prison.
And what were the reasons that he gave you?
Objection policy or the answer.
Overall.
He was so ashamed that he felt he would be humiliated if he told about the molestation. He felt so guilty already. He believed that if this came out that he would ruin whatever was left of the family name. In fact, he had been told by at least one family member that under no circumstances, no matter what, was he ever to let this dirt out. He also believed that this would ruin him in terms of the regard that other prisoners would have for him, and that everybody in the whole world would think he was a homosexual, and that his girlfriend would leave him, and that for the rest of his life he would be like the Elephant Man.
In fact, that characterization that he felt that he was like the Elephant Man does appear in the notes, does it not?
Yeah.
They're not wrong. If you guys were around in the 90s, they were just made the laughing stock of the nation with skits on SNL and everywhere. Like it was just talked about all the time for months and months and months. And this trial went on for months. And it was the media did not take kindly to this story, to any of it. They weren't ready for it. Nowadays, I think they would take it a little differently, but maybe not, because we just saw Ashley Benefield go to prison for protecting herself against her abusive ex-husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, but whatever. She's now facing up to 30 years in prison because she protected herself.
Objection, Councilor.
Overruled. The answer will stand.
Now, you indicated on direct examination, Dr. Vicary, that because you do see your practice consists of people charged with crimes, by and large, you are concerned about whether they're lying to you, correct?
All the time.
Did you believe Eric Menendez was lying to you?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond scope.
Sustain.
Mrs. Bozanic just asked you a series of questions about people faking and lying, correct?
Yes, she did.
And when Eric Menendez told you about his hallucinations, did you believe he was faking or lying?
Your Honor, objection, beyond scope.
Sustain.
Well, I'd move to have all that cross-examination stricken as irrelevant, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Now, did you have discussions with Eric about how he felt about being in jail?
Yes, I did.
And what did he express in that regard?
Objection, Councilor.
Overruled.
I was quite shocked to find that he liked it in the jail. He said that for the first time in his life, there was no pressure on him, that he wasn't afraid being in his one-man cell, that anybody was going to beat him up or rape him, as had been the case when he had been at home. That he didn't have to be number one, he didn't have to be perfect, and he didn't have this feeling that he was under this incredible pressure 24 hours a day.
And did you consider it healthy or normal for somebody to like to be in this horrible part of the jail?
I mean, it was startling.
Like I said, prison was better than the prison he had at home growing up in the Menendez household.
What did you make of it?
Objection, beyond scope.
Question is vague.
Okay. Did that tell you anything about his personality structure and his life experiences?
Objection, beyond scope.
Sustain.
Was that attitude that he expressed about being in the jail and the manner in which he expressed it significant to you?
Objection, irrelevant, beyond scope.
It's beyond the scope of the direct examination.
Well, if we may approach on this.
Certainly.
Thank you.
All right, your next question.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Let me just go back to some of the questions Mrs. Bozanic asked you, Dr. Vicary. Is it more likely in general that forensic psychiatrists would be contacted by the defense than the prosecution in criminal cases?
No, that's characteristic. The prosecution is very reluctant to contact or get involved with psychiatrists for several reasons.
Why?
Objection, that is beyond scope.
Sustain.
Isn't it true that all forensic psychiatrists tend to work more for the defense because there are things known as psychiatric defenses?
Yes, that's one of the reasons.
Okay. And are there other reasons?
Yes, there are.
Is it because forensic psychiatrists are biased in favor of the defense?
Some are. In fact, I would say most are.
Are you?
Well, I think that I'm perceived as having a slight or significant bias in favor of the defense, although I happen to be on the list of approved psychiatrists, one of the few, perhaps out of 25 or 30, maybe there's 5, that is acceptable to the prosecution.
And are you one of the people that the prosecution requests?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustain.
Why are you biased slightly in favor of the defense? You're not talking about in this case, you're talking about in general. Is that correct?
I think that's because in every report that I do, I put in recommendations about treatment, and I seem to be...
Because he's dealing with the individuals who are supposed perpetrators, and yet they're also victims. So it's a very gray scale. It's not black and white because these individuals are both, they can be both a perpetrator and a victim. And that is what these boys are.
One of the doctors, believe it or not, that actually gets it with regard to child abuse and that connection between those kind of experiences and individuals later in life that wind up at juvenile hall and jail and prison.
So are you saying that you have some professional sympathy towards the abused?
Your Honor, I object at this point, being beyond scope.
Well, it's leading.
Okay. Well, why don't you explain what that means?
Explain what?
Explain. I asked you if you would tell us why you feel you're biased in favor of the defense, and you said you're one of those who gets it with regard to child abuse. But I don't understand what that answer means.
Your Honor, I object to this being relevant.
Sustain.
Do you believe that the opinions that you have rendered in this case, Dr. Vicary, are objective ones or biased ones?
I believe that they're objective.
Now, apart from the case that you recently testified in 2 weeks ago, a competency case, have you actually testified in the regular trials of people who are claiming psychiatric defense? Have you testified in behalf of the prosecution?
Objection, taken to time.
Overruled.
Yes, I have.
Now, you're requested to evaluate a fairly large number of criminal defendants, correct?
Every week.
And do you always provide helpful information to their attorneys?
No, I would say in the majority of cases, the opinions that I give in regard to the critical legal issues are not helpful to the attorneys, the defense attorneys.
And so you don't testify in those cases where your opinions are not helpful to the defense, where you are basically in disagreement with them. Is that correct? You don't testify for the defense in those cases.
Correct.
Now I wanted to focus your
Basically meaning if he doesn't believe in what he's saying, he's not going to testify. So he wouldn't testify. He wouldn't be testifying for the boys if he didn't believe well, for Eric, if he didn't believe what Eric is saying and it didn't make sense to him, the patterns and behaviors.
for a moment on the time of the disclosure that when Eric Menendez first started to talk to you about the molestation. Do you recall that it was during a time when I was out of the country?
Objection, irrelevant, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, that was around that time that you were in Europe.
And was it when I came back from Europe in September that we talked and you informed me of this information you had obtained from there?
Excuse me, that's also understanding.
It's also leading.
Well, with respect to dating it in August, does the fact that I was on vacation...
It sounds like it's leading here.
Well, but it's so insignificant.
Well, then don't ask it.
Was my vacation schedule something that you considered in dating these disclosures?
Yes.
And what was your understanding
Like, why? Come on with these stupid objections.
of where I was at the time that Eric was making these disclosures to you?
You were in Ireland.
And in going back and looking at it now, was it helpful for you in dating it that I told you when I was in Ireland?
Yes.
Now, you've indicated that in the typical case you write a report. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is it ordinarily on the basis of that report that whichever party got you involved in the case, whether it was the defense or the prosecution or the judge, that a decision is made as to whether or not you're going to testify?
Yes.
And why didn't you write a report in this case?
I wasn't asked to, and every couple of weeks more piles of records would come to my office, which would mean that I would have to read that in advance of preparing a report. So it's like I was always behind here, getting more information.
And right through the start of trial, where there's still new witness interviews and more witness interviews that were being provided to you?
Yes, there were all sorts of new records that were coming into my office.
And when the trial began, did that stream of paper continue?
Unfortunately, that's the case.
In addition to that, Dr. Vicary, were you usually when you write a report, you're trying to inform the person who sought your assistance of what your findings are, what information you're getting, what your conclusions are?
Yes.
And do you usually write a report because you can't talk on the telephone or see in person all of the people on all of the cases that you need to communicate with?
That's one of the reasons that you make a report.
And with respect to this case, did you and I communicate regularly?
Yes, we did.
About how often?
At least every couple of weeks.
And would you be informing me of your opinions and conclusions and what information you were getting when you would contact me?
Objection, the undisclosed policy.
Yes, if there was anything significant or important that came up that I thought you should know, I would contact you.
And was I contacting you and telling you about new information that we were discovering during the course of the investigation of the case?
Yes.
And telling you that there'd be more coming?
Yes.
Does every person that you evaluate in a homicide case show the basket case characteristics that Eric Menendez did when you saw him?
Overruled.
No.
How typical was his behavior compared to the other people accused of homicide that you had evaluated in custody?
Very, very unusual.
Now, is it very, very unusual, Dr. Vicary, that people have tried to pull a fast one on you and give you, like this Mr. Marks, a fake story?
They do it every week.
And in your opinion, was it your opinion that Eric Menendez was trying to do that to you?
Your Honor, I object to the undisclosed.
Overruled. No, that was not my impression.
And you said it was your opinion that, in fact, he was having auditory hallucinations. Is that correct?
Yes, there are ways to focus in on that and to determine whether that seems to be a genuine symptom or a fake symptom.
And what are those ways?
Number one, you do not accept the symptom just because the person says it. I'm always suspicious when somebody says that.
All right.
So I have trick questions that I ask them. I say, oh, you're hearing voices. Good. Tell me about it. That's the first question.
And what's tricky about that? See, even the judge didn't think that was tricky.
That's tricky because that question does not have the answer. You see, it's a vague question. A lot of patients think that they can just say that and that it'll be accepted. So now you've challenged them. All right, give me the specifics.
Okay.
And they say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, what do these voices say? Okay, because the truly sick patients have characteristic things that they tell us about the voices, all right? For example, they do not say things like the scores to sporting events, okay, or what the weather is like, okay? But the fakes don't know this, so oftentimes they blunder, and they say, the voice said it was a nice day today.
Okay.
Right? The true voices are not like that.
What are the true voices like?
The true voices are very inappropriate, and they say nasty, vicious, sometimes obscene things. They comment about what one's doing, and they sometimes give instructions and orders.
That's like, is it typical, for example, of people who have been diagnosed as schizophrenics to claim that they hear voices that give them orders to do things, voices from superior beings?
Correct.
And that's
But Right.
typical auditory
That's one of the tests that you use. Another test is to see if the person has the other characteristics that go along with a person that truly would have hallucinations. For example, if they are truly hearing voices, then at times the patients will actually look because it's real to them. So you'll be talking to a patient, even patients that deny that they're hearing voices, but every now and then they'll turn their head because it is like there is another person there. They also have other objective signs in terms of their appearance that go along with a genuine hallucination.
So if you're going to accept the fact that someone is having a hallucination, you would need to see other things in their psychological makeup at that time that would be consistent with that.
There would be a whole set of characteristics that would go along with a genuine hallucination, including reports from the trustees or other prisoners on the module with the patient.
I was going to ask you a couple questions about that. Now, with respect to Eric Menendez, did you see things about his psychological makeup that were consistent with or went along with the auditory hallucinations that he reported to you?
Yes, I did.
And what were those things?
You asking for actual recitation or just characterization? What sort of things?
Just a characterization of what things.
Right. You may answer the question.
Do you understand the question?
I thought I did, but I think I lost it.
Okay.
Why don't you re-ask it?
You said there were other things that you do when you're evaluating whether someone's report of auditory hallucinations is trustworthy. And I asked you, did Eric demonstrate other things that made the report of auditory hallucination trustworthy in your opinion?
Right, and my answer to that is yes.
Okay, and just generally, what were the other things that you saw that made the auditory hallucinations consistent or reliable?
The level of his emotional distress, his demeanor when he was describing the symptom, the specifics of what the voices were telling him, and the other symptoms that he was experiencing. And finally, the logical train of his thinking, which at times became what we call tangential. That is to say, he started to skip off the track.
And is that fairly common in people who are experiencing hallucinations, that they're also having difficulty in logical thinking and staying on track?
That's a rather classical finding.
Now, did he get better with therapy and medication?
Overall.
Yes, he did.
I mean, he doesn't appear now in court the way he did to you in the jail 3 years ago, does he?
Oh, he's dramatically better.
Does that make you suspect that what you saw in the early months was not real?
No, it doesn't. It does indicate that he really wasn't a crazy person. He was just having symptoms similar to a crazy person.
And to what did you attribute the fact that he could genuinely...
He was having a mental breakdown because of everything. He was so traumatized by his whole upbringing and then having to off his parents because of the horrible things that they were doing to him. So he was traumatized by all of it.
be having symptoms similar to a crazy person and not be a crazy person?
Just that he was stressed out. We can take anybody and subject them to enough stress, or we can give them wonderful things like PCP or amphetamine, and we can make you crazy.
What was it?
Even when you're not a crazy person to begin with.
And you've already indicated that it wasn't just his being in jail or even being charged with this. It was stuff from his background that made him stressed out enough to demonstrate symptoms of a crazy person. Is that right?
It was a combination of several factors, yes.
Now, you said that part of Eric's personality structure is that he's a person who is impressionable, who is more inclined to follow. I believe, does that have something to do with his being a victim type?
Yes, those kinds of individuals are more vulnerable to being victimized by others.
And would that have made Eric more vulnerable to being victimized by his mother and father? I believe you testified yesterday that this characteristic of his made him more vulnerable to be abused as a child.
This is all beyond the scope of the direct exam or the cross-examination here.
I think this
It's very relevant, Judge.
suggestibility was done into you.
All right, but it's already been covered.
Now, do you have any reason to believe that anyone told Eric Menendez what to tell you?
The only...
Your Honor, I object to this calling for speculation.
Well, as it's phrased, it does perhaps do so if you want to rephrase it.
Dr. Vicary, you've been given stories by inmates before.
Every week.
Pat little tales of their being victims or their being sick.
There are a lot of game players at the jail that want to be diverted into the mental health system as opposed to the general population.
And was there, I mean, over the course of these 88 sessions that you had, first of all, do you think in 88 sessions you could tell if someone's faking or selling you a story or not?
In my experience, it would be very difficult for virtually any prisoner to get by one of the most experienced, respected forensic psychiatrists on the court list.
And that's not just you, that's the others as well, isn't it?
Right. There are several seasoned veterans on that list that are known for spotting fakes. I happen to be one of them. In fact, I even teach malingering at USC Medical School.
And you did not form.
He teaches malingering, which is basically faking symptoms. He teaches that in school. And he's the one of the top experts in determining if people are lying. So, what's his opinion? Do you think he thought Eric was lying? I don't think so.
The opinion, did you, that Eric Menendez was malingering when he talked to you about his background, his childhood, or the molestation?
That's correct.
He did talk to you about the homicides as well, did he not?
Excuse me, ma'am, this is the answer.
I'm not going to ask for...
Well, you've already asked that on direct examination.
Did I?
You did.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Bozanich asked you if it was common for abused children to hate their parents. Do you recall that question?
Yes, I do.
And I believe you said that you might think so, but in fact, they don't all hate their parents. Correct?
Many of the prisoners that I have seen over the years at the jail, even those that are charged with capital offenses and that are facing the gas chamber, and that I know from interviews with family members and investigation reports, have been very severely abused, physically, sexually, psychologically, will deny it.
But we're talking about feelings towards the parents.
Right. In terms of expressing any negative feelings towards their parents, they do not have any. In fact, in preparing the case...
Because you know what? They take those feelings out on other people. Those psychos. The ones that end up doing horrific things to other people. And they're doing it because they've repressed all those anger issues and they're taking out their anger on that person in response to the maltreatment that they had previously by their parents.
Explaining what would be necessary about revealing the family dirt, they say things like...
Yeah, I reckon this is being irrelevant is what other people think.
They say things like, I would rather go to the gas chamber, I'd rather go to prison for the rest of my life, rather than to reveal that my mother molested me, or that my father beat me senseless on a weekly basis.
Okay, what was that? But I'm not sure you're understanding my question. I'm talking about the expression of anger or hatred towards the parent.
Well, don't you see that's related? I mean, if they're not willing to be honest about the terrible experiences they've had, they're also unwilling to be angry and to hate the abuser.
I see. And is that typical of abused kids?
And the anger is misplaced, like I said.
Willing to be angry and to hate the abuser.
I see. And is that typical of abused kids, that they are unwilling to hate the abuser?
Not all children, but frequently individuals that wind up in the criminal justice system are quite shockingly that way. And from a psychological point of view, that's part of the problem.
What's part of the problem?
Here, I object to this being the answer.
Now, you indicated in answer to that question, Mrs. Bozanich,
Even he's getting frustrated with all of her stupid objections.
that the ones that don't hate their parents have more problems than the ones that do.
In general, that's true.
Okay, and what is the reason for that, in your opinion?
Here, I object to this being the answer.
If you've been beaten and humiliated and raped all your life, and you can't face the abuser, where does all this frustration and anger go?
Okay.
The answer is it comes out somewhere, and it usually comes out at the expense of other people, such as other people being robbed, beaten, raped, and killed.
Let's talk about the parasite cases that in your experience. In those cases,
She's saying parasite with a D. It comes up parasite with a T on the captions, but she's saying para like parents, like sua and hama. That side is that part. So it's a parasite, in case you were wondering. Not
Here,
They
I
weren't-
object to questions about parasites being the answer.
let's talk about Eric Menendez then, as an abused person. Did he hate his parents?
Your Honor, I object to that as being the answer as well.
All right, we've already gone into this as
No,
far as
don't
what he
go
had said, the defendant had said.
I'm asking for his opinion.
All right, well, first, this has already been asked and answered.
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
I could ask.
Was it your opinion that Eric Menendez had problems because he was not able to express anger towards his parents?
Your Honor, I object to that as being the answer.
Overrule.
Definitely.
From all the information that you had about this case, was there permission, if you will, in that family to express anger or hostility towards the parents?
Object to the answer.
Why don't you rephrase the question? It calls for
Let me ask you
question.
a slightly different question first. Can a person have a right to be angry against someone who, say, has abused them, and not feel anger in spite of that?
Yes.
Can people be angry subconsciously and not know it consciously?
Yes.
Is one of the goals of therapy with abused people to try to get them to actually feel anger towards the people who've harmed them?
Your Honor, this is the answer.
Overrule.
Yes,
Was that part of your purpose in your therapy with Eric?
that was one of my hopes.
That you could get him to feel anger and hatred towards these people, was it
Well,
not?
towards anyone. He was such a passive, wimpy, hopeless mess.
And he wasn't expressing anger towards his parents.
He wasn't expressing anger towards anyone.
And later in the course of the therapy, was he able to articulate anger towards his parents for what they had done?
Yeah, I think it took like 2/3 of the way through my sessions with him. This is on visit 65 or 70 or 75, that he finally told me that he had a revelation. He got angry. He got angry at his brother, and he got angry at another prisoner in the jail. And he was astounded that he was able to do this, because it had never happened before in his life.
To feel anger and be able to express anger?
Yes.
Now, anger is compared to irritability or frustration. Real anger.
Real anger, where you get up in somebody's face and you say, I'm mad at what you're doing, okay? And I have a right to be mad, and I want you to respect my feelings.
That's what's known as healthy anger.
Yes.
Okay. Even beyond that, in the early sessions when you were working with him, you've testified that he had this idolizing of his parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
In later sessions, he did express to you that there were things that he did that he hated. That he hated.
Your Honor, at this point, I expect this to be on the phone.
It's also leading.
Did he in later sessions express hatred for what his parents had done?
Your Honor, I've been asking Mr. Menendez.
Overruled. You can answer that question, yes or no.
Yes.
Do you believe that he was conscious of feelings of anger or hatred before his parents were killed?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you have a professional opinion on that?
Same objection.
Sustained.
Now, you did consider him one of those people that don't hate and therefore have more problems, correct?
Yes. With one exception.
Yes.
He hated himself. And that was the reason that he was depressed and suicidal for years prior to the killing of his parents.
Your Honor, move to strike that particular conclusion as being the scope.
All right, the objection overruled. The answer will stand.
Now, you said that you were aware, because it was reported to you, that Eric was being visited by people up to and including, I take it, late August 1990. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you knew he was visited by people from then to now?
Yes.
And was there any other mental health professional that you were aware of who was visiting him at that time?
Objection made. One time.
Sustained.
As up in between the time you first started seeing him in late August?
To my knowledge, there was only one other mental health person that saw the defendant, and that was the chief psychiatrist at the jail, a man named Eugene Kuntzman, who I had contacted because I wanted to make sure that we were working together in terms of his medication.
Now, you don't believe that Dr. Kuntzman talked to Mr. Menendez about his case, though?
No, Dr. Kuntzman was merely checking to see how he was doing emotionally and how he was doing on his medication.
You were asked if you saw Eric in court during those early days when he was still in this very bad condition. You recall those questions?
Yes.
Dr. Vicary, you have a number of patients at any given time at the county jail, correct?
Every week.
And they sort of figure out who each other are. Your patients sort of know each other as your patients, do they not?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Do your patients in the jail report on each other to you from time to time?
Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The unspoken and confidential.
Overruled. You can answer that yes or no.
Yes, they do.
And were there other patients, well, first of all, and do deputies sometimes tell you about the behavior and condition of your patients in between your visits?
If I ask them, they do.
Or did you obtain information about how Eric was doing in between your visits from other people
What time frame are you talking about?
during this early time when he seemed to be in such bad shape?
Yes, I did.
And did that information confirm your opinions about his condition?
Objection. Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes.
And do you recall now what sorts of people you were getting information from that confirmed your opinion?
Your Honor, objection is being irrelevant.
Overruled.
Primarily, it was the deputies in charge of the module where he lived, and one or two other prisoners who were long-term prisoners.
And were people expressing concern for his mental health?
Your Honor, objection irrelevant.
Sustained as to the content of what was said.
Were you eliciting this information from people, or were they volunteering it to you?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
I have nothing further on.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor, we ask that you not be excused.
All right, you may step down. It's possible that you might be recalled. You're not excused, but you're excused at this time.
All right. So that was Dr. Vicary. And what was I going to say? So when we might see him, we're going to see some more of the experts. We don't see Vicary again. We see Dr. Burgess and Dr. Conti, who is our guy for next week, our expert for next week, who are going to go over, they review the tape. So we hear the Oziel tape in some episodes, and throughout some of the experts give some commentary and some testimony throughout. But we'll get there not next week, but the week after that, we're going to get to the tape, the Oziel tape. So, all right, that was William Vicary. Like I said, he treated Eric from 90 to 96, and apparently he was a basket case when he first started treatment. I don't know if that's a technical term or not, but that's what they were using in court. And it took him a few months and some different adjustments in medication, and he became a lot better. His symptoms were a lot better. He wasn't having as many auditory hallucinations, and he wasn't scared. But that's a big takeaway too, is that he felt safer and happier in prison than he did in the home that he lived in. What does that say to you? The only world that he ever knew was a really controlling, abusive environment where he had no say, no autonomy, no self autonomy with his own body. Like, nothing. He had nothing of his own in that household. Now he can be free to be himself and speak his truth, and hopefully he is doing so, continuing to do so. I know he started a bunch of programs in prison. He's using his experience to help others. I know there's like an art program that I think he's behind. He does a lot of art in prison. So he is within, in some ways, he's using his trauma to help others, I think. And it's cathartic for him to be able to do that and to talk about his story. For any trauma survivor, it is any victim of DV, no matter what kind, if it's emotional, physical, sexual, whatever it is, financial, sometimes it's just financial, or not just, but I mean, usually these people control many aspects of your life, not just one. But abuse comes in many forms, and it's not just physical, it's not just SA either. It is, um, I think, the emotional and psychological damage that happens from the emotional abuse, the mental abuse, the psychological games that they play with you. That's what sticks with you more. So I feel like that's even worse sometimes than the physical, because you never get over it. Bruises heal. I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying bruises heal over time, but sometimes those things stick with you forever, especially if you've been told you're no good your whole life. So just that's a horrible way to wrap it up, but that's kind of how I'm feeling. So I'm going to go with um, ending it on a happier note. So if you are a highly sensitive person, I definitely recommend, or if you know someone who might be a highly sensitive person, do some research into it, look into it. There are several books that Elaine Aaron has written. The first one, the highly sensitive person. Then there's the highly sensitive parent, the highly sensitive person workbook, the highly sensitive person in love, the highly sensitive child, and psychotherapy. So, like if you're a parent and your kid is very sensitive and you want to learn more, psychotherapy and the highly sensitive person, improving outcomes for that minority of people who are the majority of clients. That's for HSPs, and then the undervalued self. So those are all of her books. I recommend getting some, one, both, all, I don't know. If you are highly sensitive or if you know someone who is highly sensitive, it is a life changer to understand that about yourself, if that's who you are. So, or if it's someone you know, it's a life changer to understand it and be able to approach people in a different way because now you understand them better. So it's really good information if you are interested. With that, I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Please hit the like button on your way out. Take care. Bye now.
If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.